Hey there, and welcome back to Build Explain. Before we get started today, I wanted to take the time to thank you guys for the recent growth of the channel. We've already far exceeded any expectations I could have even imagined for this. This channel was genuinely started as a hobby, something to direct my creative energy into on the weekend. But now that we are on the better half of 100 subs, I've already had a video hit 1,000 views, and I've received a plethora of positive feedback. I'm actually really excited to see where this channel and community can go. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And in return, I will try to continue to improve video quality every week. As always, if you're new to the channel and the Build and Chill series, consider clicking the link in the top right to go back to part 1. Throughout the series, we've been going over some of the finer details of individual build pieces in the order that you would naturally acquire them through your first playthrough. So if you're new to Valheim in general and want to avoid spoilers for later game materials and mechanics, jump back to the first video for the best experience. Last week, we went over the finer details of core wood and how we can use it to enhance our early builds. The extra support we gained from core wood beams also allowed us to finally build the balcony from our original build plan. Then, we briefly touched on how to actually acquire fine wood and how it can be used for furniture and transportation to add comfort, utility, and depth to our build. Now that our initial build has been pushed near to its vertical limit and would start looking a bit awkward if we expanded any more horizontally, we don't really have the necessary room to make any more major additions to our existing structure. So if we want to add anything else to this particular base, we're going to need to construct new buildings entirely. That being said, there's one major piece that we already have access to that we didn't get to add last week: portals. Portals are a major step in the quality of life for your playthrough. They allow for instant teleportation between any two locations in the world, so long as you're not carrying any items with this icon. So, unfortunately, ores, ingots, and some key items cannot be transported. Portals also require an active connection, meaning that two portals share the same password. You can easily tell a portal is active or not by simply walking close to it and checking if the portal sparks to life. The most optimal way I've found to set them up, at least in a solo playthrough, is by placing a primary portal that will always have a blank password. This means that no matter where I've traveled, as long as I'm carrying the necessary materials, I can quickly place a second portal to return home without needing to remember a specific password. This allows for a quick restock of food and ammo, repairing any gear that needs it, or depositing our loot when we have a full inventory. However, if we place this portal somewhere that we will need to return to multiple times in the future, once we have teleported back to base, we can place an additional portal and give it a unique password. Then, go back through the primary portal and rename the one at the point of interest to the password we just made. Now we have a unique, permanent two-way connection between our base and the POI, while maintaining the ability to quickly connect to the primary portal. Now, if you've been thoroughly exploring Valheim, you've probably already noticed that there can be a ton of places you're going to want to have easy access to, and that means a ton of portals. So instead of cluttering our main building, we're going to switch gears into the focus of today's video: external buildings. These smaller separate buildings usually serve a singular purpose, whether that be storage, a repair station for basic tools, or housing portals. But because they don't need to be as functional as our main house and don't require as much size, we can get even more creative with their designs. So today, let's build something interesting to house all of our portals. This build is actually something I've practiced a few times in my previous playthroughs, and since it's a little trickier than what we've built so far, I'm going to try to explain as thoroughly as I can without skipping over too much. First thing as always when starting a new build is finding the perfect spot for it. And with as much flat space as the northeast side of the house has, I believe it's time to make an addition to it. For this build, we're going to need a decent work area to start with, so try to level a sizable circular chunk as flat as possible. Make your workbench, and let's get started. The general shape of today's build is going to be a symmetrical octagon, with sides measuring 8 meters in length. We'll place down the basic outline by using 2-meter horizontal wood logs. Be sure not to cut corners and try using the 4 meters, as we will need the 2-meter snapping points for later. When rotating your pieces for the next placement, rotate twice, no more, no less. Continue to place the 2-meter logs down until you have completed the foundation. If you're like me and you misjudged the size of the project, you'll need to level out the terrain a bit more surrounding the frame. Once the workspace has been refined, we'll need to place core wood beams at each corner. Be sure to use the bottom snapping option to ensure the vertical beam is grounded. Visually inspect the beams to ensure the height of each is consistent. If so, let's add a singular 2-meter vertical beam to the tops. Now that we have the height for the walls of our building, let's fill them in. Be sure to snap the first row to the lowest snapping point of the vertical beam, not the horizontal beam. Otherwise our walls will be a bit too tall. Leave a space for the entryway and doors. And then frame in the top with more logs. Our roof a 2-meter overhang to give it more of a gazebo look. We'll start by placing 2-meter core wood beams straight out from the top corners of the vertical beams. Then by using the top snapping function, place vertical beams downward until it connects to the ground. Also double check that these are being placed at the same height as the main structure's beams to avoid some headaches down the line. Now let's start laying the external flooring around the perimeter. First, I'm going to place as many 2x2 wood floors to the available snapping points as I can. Then, to fill in the gaps, simply place additional 1x1 flooring on each side. This should smoothly overlap the floors and give us a more finished shape. Add some stairs for convenience, and finish detailing the outside with whatever style you like. Personally, I'm going to platform out the deck and use the same hand railing we used on the balcony. Here's a quick speed build of what that looks like. With the external ground portion finished, we'll start working on what actually makes this build a little unique, and the reason why we use those 2-meter beams at the beginning. But be warned, this part is going to require quite a bit of core wood, and because it isn't actually necessary to have a functional structure, if you don't feel like grinding out the materials for this, feel free to skip to the roof timestamp. Start by selecting the 26-degree core wood beam and making a V shape on the wall directly across from the doorway. This V will be your template for which directions the beam will face until they wrap back to the door. Then continue placing them in the same direction by adding them to the available snapping points, coming from either the previous beams or the bottom foundation snapping points. Avoid using the wall or vertical beam snapping points, as these will throw off the pattern we are trying to create. And once you've completed one side, place the other. To complete the back wall, all you have to do is place 1-meter vertical wood beams up the center of the wall to give us the necessary snapping points for the rest of the 26-degree core wood beams. Here's what your build should look like so far. As you can tell, this fresh build is going to come out with a lot more detail than the original house, and you'll notice that to be a pattern in the Build and Chill series. Every time we can start a structure with higher quality building materials, more than likely the quality and depth of the build is going to increase as well. Before we start on the roof, we need to frame in the overhang on the outside of the building. Place 2-meter horizontal logs perpendicular to the wall using the snap point on the inner horizontal log and the top layer of wood walls. These perpendicular logs are going to act as joists for our roof. Let's quickly do this for the entire structure. Now, we need to frame in the joists, which will be slightly more time consuming because we can't simply use our default core wood links or snapping points. What we need to do is similar to what you may have done for your vertical balcony supports in part 3. We're going to have to offset a 2-meter horizontal beam by exactly 1 meter. This is done by placing a basic 1-meter horizontal beam off the side of a center joist. This will give us a snapping point to the center of our core wood beam. Then, we can close the gaps with 4-meter beams. Again, we're going to do this for the entire perimeter of the structure. Here's where the build starts to get a little tricky. We're going to start on the actual roof, which is going to require a decent balancing act, some precise placements, and a decent amount of patience. We'll need to place some ladders to get on top of our building. Once we've got some steady footing, we need to place 3 26-degree beams on the highest snapping point of each joist. I'm using regular wood beams to go for a specific look. Core wood beams will work functionally the same if that's what you choose to do. Once completed, I'm going to build some temporary scaffolding to work from, in order to spend as little time falling from the roof as possible. If you're following this build exactly, you'll need to remember 3 numbers. Every wall will have this number and pattern of 26-degree wooden beams added, so once again, we'll need to do this 8 times to lay the basic framing of the roof. And when finished, it should look something like this from the outside. Now what we need to do is place as many roofs as we can from the bottom side. This will make our work up top much less tedious later, but for now, we only want to place roofs in between the parallel beams we put up earlier. This should ultimately leave a nearly perfect circular opening in the center of the roof. Don't worry, this is intended, and we'll be making use of it later. But for now, we need to head back up to the top side of the roof, and now we need to fill in these gaps on our angles, including the beams that are barely exposed. We'll do this by adding exactly 1 column of roofs up to where the gap ends, like so. You will have probably noticed that even after that, we still have a few holes to fill in. This is where you'll need to demonstrate a bit of patience and a steady hand. We'll need to use a corner roof piece, but there isn't going to be a good snapping point for us to use, so we'll need to freehand it by using the shift placement. Do this for all of your corners, and you should at least not have to worry about rain damage anymore. Okay, so actually after recording this section, I realized that the top center snapping option is exactly perfect for what we need. So feel free to disregard pretty much the last minute or so and just use the top center for the corner pieces. We're not quite done with the roof yet. Now we want to frame the uneven sections to give it a more intentional look. You'll probably agree that the roof looks incredible already, but before we head back down, there's one last detail I want to add. For every original outside column of beams we place, let's add one more beam, giving it an almost crown-like finishing touch. And here's the finished roof design in all of its glory. From here on out should be a lot simpler, and less frustrating if you're as prone to falling off of roofs as I am. Now before we tear down our temporary scaffolding, I want to add a few columns to the center of our ceiling. This will give us a little more support to work with, and prepare us for a little surprise that I made for the build. Since the ceiling is already near its support limit, we'll need to add some temporary support beams. But luckily, we already have a good place to put them because of the support the scaffolding needed. Once our ceiling can hold a beam or two, we'll start from the top and continue placing beams until they clip through the ground. Now we'll destroy the scaffolding, and once I'm done, I want to fill in the dead spaces between our columns with 45-degree crosses. And before we close in the bottom, we're actually going to be using this pillar as a fireplace. So let's place a few fires on the ground here, provided some much appreciated light and warmth, while having our opening act as a chimney. Next, let's move our workbench out of the way and get started on our main floors. And from what some of you have already probably deduced is that just like our exterior floors, we're going to have to make some creative adjustments. First, by orienting ourselves with the door, we'll build out the front, back, and left and right sides. Then we'll destroy any overlapping pieces, taking priority for the front and back side floors. To fill in the gaps, just place enough floors perpendicular to the corner walls that it fills in the space. Avoid doing more than this because the excessive amount of clipping floors will make the build look a little sloppy. Then frame in the pieces surrounding our fireplace, and we're finally ready to make use of the interior. If absolutely necessary, we can fit 2 portals per wall, but that wouldn't leave any room for framing or aesthetics and would look a little bit cluttered. And at the moment, 7 portals should be more than enough for this stage of the game, and we can always add more later. For this particular setup, I wanted to feel like a classic world select stage from something like Crash Bandicoot or Donkey Kong 64, so we need to build some holes for our portals to actually sit in. Start by walling off the first layer of floors, including the pieces that will overlap. Leave a 2-floor wide space in the center of the wall for the portal itself, then close off the open spaces, which should give you a rough W shape in the corners of the room. Repeat this for the entire building. We'll use the W's as our guide for where our walls need to build up from. Just make sure to use inverted 45-degree walls above the open spaces we created. Fill in the tops of 1 meter half walls and 26-degree walls where necessary. Next, let's frame in our rough edges and add some detail with core wood. let's add a few light sources to our walls to bring in a little more life. And finally, let's add our portals. I don't want the walls to block the visual effects of the active portals, so I'm going to make sure to place them as close to the opening as possible. Again, this may take some patience, but the final result is worth it. Really quick, I'm going to teach you a trick to hiding your workbenches in the buildings where they aren't necessary to have access to. All you have to do is pick a bit of floor next to the ground. It doesn't need the ground for structural integrity. Break 2 floors and use your pickaxe to dig out enough terrain to place the workbench in. Replace the floors and destroy the old workbench. Now that we have some decent lighting in here, and we don't need so much natural lighting, let's add our doors and door framing beams. And as our finishing touch, let's add signs to label the portal's destinations. And don't place them backwards. So let's take a look at the finished product of our labors. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I had a lot of fun digging this build out of the old blueprints and bringing it back to life with the improved building systems. And once again, I can't thank you guys enough. Every bit of engagement I get helps motivate me to keep going, and more importantly, to try to improve each video as we go. So as always, if you liked today's video, or even binged the entire Build and Chill series up to this point, be sure to subscribe and leave a like, because next week we'll be stepping into the territory of stone, and how to make a designated forge for our growing village. See you next time.